Now let's create our user update component. So I'm going to use the Stenciljs tools to create a new component, and it'll be page user update. So first thing, we need to grab that user we're passing over here in the router. So we need to import prop. We need to create a variable to hold our user in here. And we also need to import the user from our user interface. In this component, we're going to update our user. But because this is a property and we are passing it from somewhere else, it is not a good practice to mutate this user, because it can cause some unexpected side effects to your user. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm gonna create the lifecycle here on will load, and let's say I have my user in there, and the name is Flavio. Now if I were to create a new user that will be equals that one, and I come and change the new user.name, now if I console log the first user in there, what do you think is gonna happen? So let me run the server. I'm going to my user update page, and there you go. The user is not Flavio. So if somewhere down in your component tree you change something, you mutate a property that you're not supposed to, it's gonna trickle down all over your app, and that's gonna make it really hard for you to find where is the problem. That's why it's a good practice to avoid mutating your properties like this. But if you do need to do, you can pass an option here, mutable true, so we can mutate it. Here are the properties we're going to change. If you go our interface, we need to change the display name, bio, website, Twitter. It's gonna paste in here, and we need to import state here at the top. There's a GitHub as well. Now we can create our function that will set the state, and this user we're getting from our app. So if there is a user, we are going to grab all this information and add to it. So I'm just gonna use a new JavaScript syntax. We could do this dot display name equals user dot display name. This dot user dot display name, or we can just destructure the user with the information we need equals this dot user, and now here we just use those variables. It makes for a better syntax. So if you haven't seen this before, this is called destructuring. Okay, so we can call it on our component will load. Now when this component loads, we grab this user and set these variables in here with that information. If not, it will be null. Okay, now let's create some form inputs that we can use after. So I'm going to create an array here, and I'll make an ion list. Ion list has a header, which looks quite nice. And then we're going to have a bunch of ion items in here. Each ion item will have a label and an ion input. So we need 4. And we need one with a text area. So for all of them, the position on the ion label, I want it to float. Try to display name, bio, site, Twitter, and GitHub. Now the value of this field, it's going to be these properties in here. This will be loaded, the information when the component is rendered. So in order for us to grab the information from these values, we need to name it so we can refer to them after. So display name. Now we're going to create a function that will grab the event, the onInput event, and we're going to extract the information from them. For each of them we need an onInput, and here we have the event, and we're going to pass it to our, let's call it input handler. Now we can create it. So here just below the input state, and we need the event. Okay, this event, let's leave it type any, and let's just console log it. Event.target.value. That's where the information will be. It's going to start the server, and we can check that in the browser. So here's our form. We're grabbing the user from the user data we already have. Now if I type something, I get my input change over here. So I'm just going back in there. I'm going to add this onInput to all of the other components. Now if I do any of them, I'm getting each of them here. So now let's use this name so we can see which of the inputs are receiving information, and we can add them to these properties over here. So our input handler, we're going to create a switch case over here, and first going to remove this console log. And I'm going to create a variable called value, so we don't need to type event target.value all the time. Now switch. And it's going to be the event.target.name. So here we're getting the value, and here's the name of the input. That's why we need it. So now in case the name is display name, say this dot display name equals value, and then you can break. You break so to avoid a infinite loop. So case bio, this.bio equals value. Okay, now we have all our data. We can create a function that is gonna save it. So this will be async because you're gonna wait for it to do some database stuff, so we can tell the user that if it was successful or not. So update, and we can just create the payload variable to hold out the information. So display name, display name will be the one when it's ready. So bio, and GitHub. So here's important that you mark null as well in case there is no data, the user didn't input anything, because if you don't, this value is going to be undefined and you cannot save undefined values to Firestore. So now here we can just console log that payload, and let's add a button so we can call this update function. And to do that, let's do one on the top here. So I'm just gonna go back to my user details and I'm gonna copy this header here. And remove this. I'm gonna change for update profile. I'm gonna add a button here for the save. Save. You can just call that function on click. And this.update. Okay, now we can see this result over here. I'm gonna restart my server. Now here we have the save button, and now our component is displaying really weird. And that's because most of the time you're gonna need to add the Ion content in here, because that is what Ionic expects. So it kind of influences how the CSS behaves. So now it looks much better. Let's try to do some tests over here. If I click save, I get my data over here. So I'm ready to send it to my service so it can do something about it. Now, next thing to do is to add our image upload so we can grab the user's image as well. So back in our code, just below this Ion list, I'm going to create kind of a banner over here on the top, so it gives some space and some nice place where to put the user avatar. So I'm gonna just create an empty div with a class cover. Now for the CSS, it's gonna add some CSS over here. And it's gonna have a height of 25%. Just like that. So let me just add our avatar. So we see what we're doing. I'm gonna add the thumbnail again. take an image. So here we need to do the checking if there is a user. Run the file. Same goes in here. Here we can add null as well, and it will be the same. But I started with undefined, and it's better be consistent. Now let's go check. We have our user here. Let's style it. So the thumbnail, I'm also gonna have it position relative and of a size 100 pixels. Here, because we're dealing with Ionic component, and we need to add the dash dash to get the custom size. And that, as I mentioned before, you can see in the doc on the bottom of the page, there's always styling information in there. So for the image, I'm gonna make it round, add some padding around, and do it a white border because the background is green. For now, I'm gonna add a border. I'll save and see how it looks like. Okay, so now I want this to be here in the middle. So here you just need to add some margin. So it's gonna be auto on the sides, 0 from the bottom, and -50 from the top. There you go. And you have that white border in there. Doesn't look so nice, but the green background is not meant to be there. Alright, so I can remove that background there. Now we should add our input button so we can open the File Explorer. Just below the Ion thumbnail, I'm going to create a div so we can add the label. So here you need to pay attention because we're dealing with JSX, and on the label we have a property that's called for, but because we are working with JSX and for is a keyword for JavaScript, we need to put HTML for, and that's how it works, JSX and HTML properties. So if something doesn't work, is because that keyword is already taken by something and you cannot use it. So here I'm gonna create a file input, just a name so I can target it. Now for the label, I'm just gonna make a camera, an icon. So Ion icon, name, camera. Again, these icon names, you can find it on the Ionicon's website. So here I'm using a normal input and not the Ion input, because the Ion input is a wrapper on the native input. So if you have to use the Ion input, you have to dig into the element itself and then find this input. So let's just keep it simple. It will be type file. And because it's an image, we're gonna accept only image of any type. And the ID will be the label over here. Now here we can call onChange, camel case, autocorrect. So event this dot update photo URL. We need to create this function, and we pass in the event. So let's go ahead and create this function, just not to avoid the error in there. So, and we pass the event. Here we can console log it already. So okay, so console log in the event, and back here have our input. Let's take a look. Here you go, we have our icon, and we can open it. So now let's style it so we can get rid of all of this ugliness in here. Back in our CSS, we're gonna target our Ion icon first. So let's add the CSS for our icon. Okay, this is for our icon. Next, we need to do the avatar file input. So the only thing we need to do is to hide it, because right now it shows in here. What you're gonna do, you're just gonna change the opacity and make it disappear. Because if you remove it, you put it on the side, you're gonna have some problems with the clicking. Now our icon is getting centered on top of our thumbnail, and this one is gonna hide the bottom. So let's restart our server so we can pick up these changes properly. Now there you go. We have the bottom on top, and we can click and it opens. So now let's try to change it here to see if you get the... And here's our event. Now if you go to target, which is the input itself, and scroll down to files, here we're getting an array, and here's our file. So let's console log this file, and that's what we're gonna be sending to our service. So back in our code, just gonna close this now, we don't need it anymore. Here is the event.target.files, and this is the array. It's gonna reload and do it again. There we go, it's an array. So let's just grab the number 0, which is the index for the array. And that's exactly what we're gonna be sending to our service. It's gonna add any over here. Now we have our photo update, and we have the file to send. And here we also have already the payload to send to our service. Now we can go ahead and start to create our service so we can make use of this payload and this file over here. Okay, now for the service. We're going to create a few more functions in here, one to update and one to update the photo URL. So let's start with the simple one and update the user profile. Here we're gonna get that payload, which is going to be a user, and that's from our interface here. We're also gonna need the UID, so we know which document to save this data to, and we're gonna get this information from that component. So let's just call it update user. Back in our component, the user page, user update. So here, just below the payload, we're gonna use the user service. It's auto importing over here. And we can update user. Now the UID is this .user.uid, and the payload. So now we're getting this error, and it's basically saying that we're trying to save in this user, but it's missing some information, like the role, user, UID, and we're only passing this one in here. So you could just come here and mark all of them as optional with the interrogation in front like this. Or you can come in here, and when it says payload, we're expecting the payload to be a user, but we can use a TypeScript partial, which is a generic that tells TypeScript that this is some pieces of the user. Don't bother if it's something missing. So if you save it and you go back in there, our error is gone. I find this a better way of doing it, because for the user, for example, you probably wouldn't want them not to have a UID as an optional, or other things like email or whatever. The role in here, for example, is quite important as well. So I prefer to keep all of it as a required, and when I need to pass it, I set it as a partial over here. Now, this is only for TypeScript. TypeScript will convert your code to JavaScript, and it's going to strip away all of it. This is just for better development experience. You're going to have the errors telling you like, hey, are you sure you're doing this right? Or you're going to have the auto-completion. It's not necessary. You can easily slap any here on front of anything and be done with TypeScript, but then what's the point? Anyways, let's call Firestore, and we already have it imported. Now doc, here it's users, and we're gonna use the UID to get that document. Now we can just call set, and we're gonna set the payload. Now remember, set is destructive. It's gonna erase your whole document and create a new one with this data. So we need to pass the option merge true, and that will merge with the existing content. So we are returning this. So back here in our function update, we can just let's await for this function to be done, and we console log profile has been updated. Now let's go and test it. It's going to start the server. Now in our Firebase app, we have our rules over here, which allows the owner to write. So we shouldn't have any problems with this. Okay, now I have my user here on the side. So just gonna add my details, and I'm gonna click save, and there we go. Everything got saved in there, and I have my profile has been updated here. So our update function works. Now let's go and do the photo URL. Now here we need to send this to the service again. So let's call this service, user service, and we don't have the function yet, so update photo URL, and we're gonna pass that data in there. And we also need to send the UID of the user, so we know what are we saving. Now let's go create this function on our service. So it's our UID and our file, and here's type of file. Now we need to import storage from our Firebase, and this is the storage from our Firebase file that is being set to our application. Okay, inside I'm gonna use a try catch because you're gonna be dealing with a async function and anything can go wrong in here. So first we need to reference our bucket on our storage. So let's create a upload ref and we can call it storage.ref. Now here we need to save as a child because the ref is your bucket, or the root of your bucket. So, and then you call child is anything that you want to create inside the bucket. So we want to create a folder called users, and here we're gonna store all the photos from this user under his UID. Now we're saving photo URL. Now here's the thing, you could, if you store like this, it will not store the extension of the file, and every time the user updates the photo, it's gonna override this one in the bucket. If you want to save every photo that the user uploads, you should add file.name here. And that's gonna be whatever name the user uploaded at that time of the file. So, but I want the user to have only one photo URL and get overridden. So I save some space on my bucket and avoid all that random photos that is not being used. Now we can do a upload task. And this will have some information about the upload itself, things like the download URL, which we're gonna use to save to our database. So upload ref dot put. You can put a file to it. It's that simple. Whenever you call put, it's gonna start the upload automatically. So that's the final part of it. And so here we're gonna get that photo URL and then we're gonna save to our database. So you need to await again for the upload task now. And we're gonna get the reference and get download URL. Now we can console log this photo URL. And that's the link that we're saving it to our Firestore doc, and then call the users again. Update. Update is another option that you can do instead of the set. The update will not destruct, so you can just pass the data just like that. So we have a set and update method that you can use to change data. The difference is that update will fail if the data is not already created. If there is no user with this UID, the update will fail. The set, if there is no user, it will create. So set creates and updates, update only updates, and fail if the document doesn't exist. Now after that, just console log. I'm also going to console log any error that might occur. Now you're ready to test. Let's check it out on the page. Now I'm just gonna upload an image. There we go. And it was changed. This was the console log of the photo URL. Now the reason we could do this is because our Firebase rules if you check it out our Firestore, we're allowed to write, so we did that before. But our storage rules, anyone can write if he's authenticated. Anyone can write and read if he's authenticated. So let's change this a little bit so we have a bit more secure application. Let's first make it null for everybody. So no one can write anywhere, this all path. Same as the Firestore, we have our bucket in here. Inside this object, the bucket. And then we can do match blocks over here. So this one is matching every path. Same as here we have matching all documents. Now, let's upload this to Firebase so we can have this change. So Firebase deploy only storage. And that should deploy this file over here. Okay. If you check on the project, storage, now it's updated. Let's check it now. Need to load the server. Now if I try to upload an image again, I get the user doesn't have permission and unauthorized. So we locked out our storage. So now let's create a rule that will allow this user to update anything that is under his UID over here on the storage users. There. So back in our code, we can do a match block over here. So match users. And here's the user ID. Now we can do everything here as well. This all paths will match any sub collections that you add. For example, users, user ID, photos, photo ID, and so on. So let's allow read for anyone because it's a profile photo. So I think anyone could be reading that. So now allow write. So if request.auth.uid equals user ID. So if the authenticated user is the same as the user that is the data requested, we allow it to write. So now if you save it, we can send it back again to Firebase. Firebase deploys only storage. Let's go back to our app. I'm gonna reload server again. Now back in our app, I'm going to upload the photo again. Now it got uploaded. Even though it's the same photo, it will override the previous one in there. So that's it about our user update. We can update the entries. We can update the photo URL. Here on the bio, we can add some space in here as well. If you go to the component user update page and you scroll down here on the text area, the text area accepts a rows value, which is the same as the native one that accepts columns and rows. So we can do four rows. Now it should be a little bit bigger in here, so it looks nicer. Now our functionality works. Now we can do some improvements in here. For example, with this banner we added over there, you can change the color, play around, maybe change the top bar here to be the same color or things like this. But that's up to you. This is design. I suck at design.